Thinks his hairstyle is modern. David Cameron thinks it's acceptable to snog his sister. And Vince the Cable thinks he's still joined at the hip to Nick Clegg. Bet you're not, Vince. He goes out on his own now. Anyway, what about the party policy makers? Are they in denial about the real challenge which faces them after the election, namely getting the economy back on track? Writer Will Self certainly thinks so and reckons that we, the voters, are all too happy to play along with it. This is his take of the week.
You're saying you will, but you know you won't. You may.
What a strange thing general elections are, and what a strange impact they have on the psychology both of the individual and the entire society. My dad may have been to public school in Oxford. He may even have belonged to a gentleman's club in Pall Mall, but he considered himself a staunch Labour Party voter, and we thought of ourselves as a traditional Labour household. Bizarre, really. I remember I used to pester him about which way he voted. He never, ever would tell me. It was something that a gentleman just didn't do. Even a socialist gentleman wouldn't tell you the way he voted. As we go into this election, everybody I know who's interested in politics has been doing that vain and ridiculous psephological thing, checking out how people are going to vote. And surprise, surprise, people seem to be conforming to the Lib Dem bounce. Well, here are the results of my poll today, Willcom or Willres or whatever you want to call it. I have polled 3 people. 2 in Ken Clarke's constituency said they too came from traditional Labour backgrounds. But no, they didn't trust anybody now, and they weren't quite sure which way they would vote. My 3rd straw poll was of the person I had dinner with, who's just acquired British citizenship. And she told me that she might consider voting Lib Dem and had done the Daily Telegraph's analysis, which showed her that she agreed with their policies, but she didn't want to let the Tory in. But there's one thing that even the most professional pollsters can't really assess, and that's the extent to which people are responding to real political and economic conditions, and the extent to which they're caught up, weightless, in the strange bubble of denial that currently enfolds the British political and social culture. You know the bubble of denial I'm talking about. The weird state of affairs that protects us against the absolutely hard and fast realisation that almost every single government department's expenditure needs to be cut by between 10 and 15% by the incoming government. Now, this debate that's coming up on Thursday evening is absolutely key for Clegg. Can he go on and continue to be and play this very skillful game of being all things to all people while being nothing in specific to anybody in particular? Or will he have the real political balls to stand up behind that lectern and say exactly where those cuts are going to fall? No, it's worse than that. Will he actually part the hairs on the neck of the British public, point to it and say, that's for the chop? And if he does have the nerve to actually stand up there and tell us that the cuts are coming, do we have the nerve to actually hear him say it?
And Will Self joins us now. Let's come on to the down bit in a minute. Are we agreed that the British are now voting in a less tribal way, that this process has been underway for quite a time and it's no longer dominated by Labour and the Conservatives?
Well, I think it's part of the evolution of non-ideological politics, curiously. We've arrived at this position in which the Lib Dems can pose as an alternative party precisely because New Labour transformed themselves in terms of where they stood on the political spectrum. So it's almost as if, having led a lot of people, a sort of tribe of socialist Israelites across the Red Sea, Labour are now looking back to find that they're no longer Israelites at all. That's my suspicion.
Well, Ken, Labour's 3rd in all the polls again tomorrow's papers. What's happened to the core Labour vote?
It's quite interesting because I think they've actually, the Tory bounce back hasn't happened. I mean, they're pretty much where they were. It looks
There's
like
no
we're stuck
momentum in the Tory vote tomorrow on the polls.
no great shift, and it's unless someone really screws up badly on Thursday, I can't see such so dramatic shifting it. I think the only thing I've noticed in the last 2 or 3 days is people that were Labour that went over to Lib Dem or Green because of the war and they felt betrayed. Are panicking now. They see all this stuff about Clegg might do a deal with the Tories, and so they're thinking of coming back. I mean, the people we lost because we weren't left-wing enough are not going to be terribly happy.
There's no sign anybody's coming back to the Labour campaign, Ken.
Well, we're talking about the few
two
handfuls
people
of
you
people
met
I
in a
meet
pub,
on the,
yeah.
But no, but these small things are an indication. They were real concerned. The average Liberal, certainly in London, which is the only place I'm working, is not keen to see a Tory government, and yet they see Clegg. Now, if Chris Huhne had been the leader, I'd be fairly confident he'd be looking in a completely different direction, and that's why I think it was so close.
Have traditional party loyalties broken down? I mean, I was struck by the figure that in 1945, about 97% of people who voted were either Labour or Conservative. And over the years, it's gone down. It stayed like that for most of the 50s. And then it began to break down after 74. And it's got more and more. Lib Dems start on a base of 62 MPs now in this Parliament. And now it's broken apart.
Well, I think undoubtedly. And of course, you've got to tie that into quite low numbers of people who voted in 2 or 3 recent general elections. So if people aren't voting, they're not talking about politics in their households. If they're not talking about politics in their households, they're not handing down a political tradition to their children, not even the political tradition of going out and voting. So I think that really goes without saying. I mean, my feeling about what's happened in the last couple of days is that, you know, Labour apparently might have come up a point, the Tories might have come down a point. So I was just beginning to wonder whether the Tories might, after all, get an overall majority by just a few seats. But tomorrow's polls don't give much hope of that. Lib Dems, amazingly now, still in the same position that they were 10 days after the first debate that catapulted them.
And in a strong second position. Not a poor second.
In a strong second position.
Strong second.
And I think the Lib Dems have only 2 things to worry about. One is some polls show that that Lib Dems are only half as clear that they're actually going to go through and vote Lib Dem as Labour voters and Conservative voters who talk to the polls. And the second is that there is now so much focus on Nick Clegg, and Nick Clegg is talking so much. He's talking all the time. One day he's talking about whether he would support Gordon Brown, the next day about what deal he did with the Tories. When you're talking that much, the chances of making a mistake get higher and higher.
In fairness, he didn't really make a mistake. I mean, it was...
I'm not saying he did. I'm saying the chances of making a mistake get higher.
It was extremely selective reporting that put that headline on The Guardian today. I mean, it wasn't actually what he said about the situation at all. And this, for me, is panic in the media, and particularly the print media. The media is still obsessed by the Sun. It was the Sun what won it, and they still like the idea that they can somehow lead in that way and be immensely influential. But I don't think that's the case.
Now,